talking about. Are you ready for heaven? Are you ready to go? Well, there's some young people that would claim, well, I'm not ready. I don't have my license yet. Or they'd say, I'm not ready because I haven't been married yet, so I haven't experienced marriage life. And, well, I haven't had my first child yet, and so I'm not ready. Take it from one who has 8 children. You got to be more ready than you claim to be. I'm teasing. I'm very excited about this message today. I want to speak on the subject, a dramatic turning point in life. It should appeal to your life and mine, as everything in your life sometimes there's events that come into your life and you say, what in the world, Lord, are you doing right now in my life? And I don't understand this. Sometimes we kind of get our hands to the plow and we don't look up, we don't look around, and we dare not look back. Remember what Jesus said. Put your hands to the plow, and looking back, you're not fit for the kingdom because you're going to make a mess. You're not going to have a straight furrow, that's for sure. You got to stay focused and everything. But sometimes you can just get busy and get working, and you just kind of go through the work, and you're looking for good in the work itself. But the work itself is maybe not good, but what God works through the work, influencing others and impacting yourself, that is what's going to work together for God's good. Well, I don't want to give away the entire sermon all in just the introductory remarks, but I want to come back to the text. And we've read that again in verse 11 as we closed last week with, He hath made everything beautiful, excellent, pleasant in His time. And so for you to be troubled by the time that you're in right now, understand that this is going to work eventually. It's going to be a beautiful thing. You say, well, it doesn't really feel very beautiful right now. It's not seeming very pleasant right now, but one day you'll look back on this and you say, I know now, or I believe I know somewhat of what God was doing in that troubling time that I was going through, the time of injury, the time of insult, the time of persecution, oppression, difficulty, relationships, financial, whatever it is. There's something that God was working in my life and through my life to help me or to help others by me. And so what should a man do in that point? Well, verse 13, and also that every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. We don't look at work as being a gift of God, but certainly it is. Prior to there ever coming sin upon the earth, God gave mankind work. And He blessed it. It was blessed. Only by sin became work to be hard work. Work used to be fun. I don't know if you have a good time when you're working. I heard somebody say that if you find a job that you can do that you enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life. And while I can understand the concept behind that, and I relate probably 98% of it, but there's still, even the things that I enjoy doing, it's still hard sometimes. It's still a struggle. Well, I want to help us, and I'll use a way of illustrating this that I think would be maybe down to earth that'll help us this morning, and we'll pray first, and we'll jump into the material this morning. Our Father, it is our pleasure to be part of your family. We're glad to have a Bible on our laps. And as we've prayed before, we pray that the Word would leap into our hearts. We pray that this morning, all that we are not, you would make us. All that we see not, you would show us. And all that we have not, you would give us. And for these things we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Well, the content of the verses is actually an answer or the solution to the question of the problem that Solomon posed back in verse number 9 when he said, what profit hath he that worketh in that wherein he laboreth? So what is the gain in all your work? Why do you do this to yourself? Ever ask yourself the question? You get done with you get maybe midway through the week and you're thinking, I was so pumped up about going to work on Monday. By Monday evening, I was dreading Tuesday. Wednesday, I prayed Jesus would come quickly. And then Thursday came around and I say, why am I doing this to myself? Isn't there anything else that I could possibly do? Is there any good in all this? Well, certainly Solomon answers the question. He says, well, there's actually no good in maybe the work itself outside of just keeping you occupied, but through the work and by the work, there is something that God is doing in your life. The pattern of our sin-cursed world does not lead us to find any profit or any gain in the midst of all of our efforts. All we find is blisters, and all we find is sweat, and all we find is toil, and all we find is pressure, and all we see is deadline, and all we hear is pressure from the boss, or griping and complaining from the followers. And am I speaking from the world you live in? Because I know it's the world that I live in. I mean, you're pressured with deadlines by the customer. You've got the boss is on you about this, that, and the other that didn't go right. And the team members are under you, and they're complaining because this, and this they have to do. And they wonder what you're going to do. And you just want to pull your hair out, and you wonder, is there any profit? Is there any gain in all of my efforts? Well, in a sin-cursed world, there would be no gain unless you could put a monetary value to it, or you can put some fame attached to it, and something like that attached to it. Then there would be. Well, I'm here to tell you that no matter, even if you made a lot of money, there's a lot of hard work involved. You go to a man like Bill Gates, who I have a sneaking suspicion he works on Sundays. Though he has millions, he'll still catch a flight going this way and that way for a talk, for a lecture. He'll go back to his headquarters. And so I still believe that he's still working, and working very hard. And so money didn't mean that he could relax. And those that have the most property in all the world, they're not relaxing. They're still working, and they're still struggling. And they're still trying to answer the problem that Solomon poses. Is there any profit in the work that I labor to do? Well, the answer then we're going to have to find in a turning point here. And by the way, what we learn in this particular message will serve us well throughout the entire rest of the book. And so by the end of the year, when we finally complete Ecclesiastes, and you say, well, why is it going to take a long time to get through Ecclesiastes? There's a lot of material, and we're trying to take our time to go through it. But we go to our jobs, we discover the same old challenges, right? We perform the same old tasks through the same old processes, and we endure the same old crises, and then we go home only to begin it again tomorrow. Right? Does that describe your week? Well, it describes mine. And it's easy through the rumbling rhythm of life to lose any awareness of what is really going on by and through all that I'm enduring in life through God's eyes. It's easy for us to become short-sighted and not look upward and say, God, you must see something good about this, because I certainly don't. And to become unaware that God is watching, that God is understanding, and that God is in control of all that is going on in your life and mine. I think it would be good to begin the sermon from an illustrative point, which I think for the most part, most of you have and will be able to appreciate. I recall one of my first aha moments. Have you ever had an aha moment? Aha! They call it through the, I can't remember what the thing is now, the Despicable Me light bulb, where they have it's a light bulb. It's an aha moment where you recognize something. You didn't see it before, and now you see it. And I found one of my first aha moments through the midway point of the first installment of Robert Mark Kamen's 1984 film, The Karate Kid. And it was not, when it first came out, people were like, oh, brother, who cares anything about this? People prior to the film were thinking that it was going to rate pretty high on the cheeseometer. But as Robert Ebert, who would be a very sharp movie critic, he said, I went to the movie expecting to see something cheesy, and I came away thinking that this is one of 1984's best films. Now, I go back, and there's a lot of one-liners from Ralph Macchio that only Ralph Macchio could say. And a lot of his cheesy phrases came in the second and the third installments, where he kind of took on himself a little bit more weight. And you know, the yo mac and cheese, you know what I like, that kind of stuff, that he comes from New Jersey all the way to California, bringing with him his accent and so forth. But in this first aha moment that I had, featuring Ralph Macchio as a very youthful Daniel LaRusso, he found himself in need of defending himself against members from the Cobra Kai, you remember. And the members of the Cobra Kai, where, you know, mercy is for the weak, we do not train to be merciful here, and so forth. And their sensei, how he was kind of a ruthless guy coming out of Vietnam. Well, having to endure some of that stuff at the high school, being picked on and bullied, he found a little bit of refuge in the maintenance man for the apartments that he lived in. I'm going ahead and give you the Cliff Note version of the movie just in case you haven't seen it. And if you haven't, what planet have you been living on? But at any rate, so this is an endearing man, a man from Okinawa, a man by the name of Mr. Miyagi. And so here's Mr. Miyagi, and he's pruning up his plants and so forth. And Daniel comes in and finds out that, he can teach him and train him in his ways of karate. And so the plan for Daniel was to defend himself and maybe become tough and be able to fight off some of these guys that were picking on him. So he goes to Miyagi, and Miyagi's going to teach him some karate when he's trying to learn it out of a book, remember. I mean, he's, doing everything that the book says to do. And Miyagi says, no, I'll train you in this and so forth. But his training plan is a little bit foreign to Daniel. Remember, he invites him over, and he's, Daniel's all ready. He's got his, thing on his head, his bandana and so forth. He's ready to, throw down. And so he gives him a scrub brush and a bucket, and he says, wash the cars. And then he shows him how he wants them washed. And then he says, I want you to go back and wax the cars. And he shows him, I want you to, wax on, and then I want you to wax off, and I want you to wax on, and I want you to wax off, and so forth. Then he shows him all his deck, and he says, I want you to sand the floor. And he says, sand this. So he kind of goes like this, and no. Sand the floor. Sand the floor. So he's in circular motions. And remember, paint the fence? Up and down. Daniel takes the paintbrush and just, he said, no. Up, down, up. And remember, he goes walking away. Up, down. And that's how the scene closes with Daniel. And finally, he's done. And I painted the fence, and Daniel's really proud of himself. Come back tomorrow. He comes back tomorrow, another paintbrush and another bucket. Now he's got to paint the house. And he's painting the house and swiping left and right, side to side, Danielson, side to side, side to side. And Miyagi goes in and takes a nap or whatever he does. So Daniel has now washed all his cars, waxed all of his cars. He's sanded all of his decking. He's painted the fence. He's painted the house. And then finally it comes to a whole crushing blow for Daniel, where he's like, I've just become your servant around here. I'm just doing all your chores for you. You haven't taught me anything. And Miyagi, of course, he uses that brilliant line, not everything has seemed. I love that line. Not everything has seemed, Daniel. And in 3.5 minutes, about 3 minutes and 33 seconds, and I watched the trailer, this particular portion of it just to remind myself of it, we're taken through a series of karate moves that Daniel has learned through Miyagi's chores. And he says, show me. Sand the floor. And so Daniel, okay, he gets down on his knees. No. Stand up. Show me. Sand the floor. And he takes his hand and goes this way. And he takes his left hand and goes this way. And then he says, show me wax on, wax off. And show me paint the fence, up, down. Show me paint the house, side to side. And then the aha moment comes when he says, hey. And then he starts, slinging his hands and his feet, and Daniel's painting the fence, and he's painting the walls, and he's sanding the floor, and he's waxing on and waxing off, and he defended all the moves. And the whole scene closes in the last 3 seconds by them bowing and no, eye to eye. They make eye contact, and he says, come back tomorrow. The aha moment comes from all of the training, all the blisters, all the paint, maybe the sunburn out there in the heat of the day doing all these chores was actually getting Daniel prepared for fights that would come. Not to instigate them, but to defend himself from them. Boy, it's a great film. And I'm no film critic, but it's a great one. I mean, it's clean. It has just some great things. It's got the hero. It's got the villain. It's got the training. It's got the even biblical teaching as what Solomon has given us. It was a dramatic turning point in the life of Daniel LaRusso. And you and I will come to a point in our life where there's going to have to be a turning point. There's going to have to come a time when you realize that all the work that you're doing, that's not the emphasis that you ought to be placing on. It's what comes through and by the work that you're doing, that God is preparing you through the work. So for you to get angry because it's Monday, don't get angry because it's Monday, because soon enough, the cycle of life, Saturday will come around. Sunday will be here again before you know it. So that you'll be able to endure another week. But understanding that something is preparing you on Monday for Tuesday, from Tuesday and Monday for Wednesday, and so forth. The dramatic turning point for our lives comes as we realize that all our work is not as it seems to be, at least not initially. There is more going on through our trials than just the difficulty. That there is more at play through our crises than just the challenges that come by them. That it's not just about being able to think on your feet quickly and be very accurate in your decisions and logical in your thought process, but the perspective shown us by Solomon is meant to stay with us for the rest of this book, to help us to understand that God is doing something beautiful in His time through your labors. There is no doubt from verse 2 through 8 a time for everything. But that's not what your life is totally consisted of. I mean, we talked about human existence as explained and defined from there's a time to be born and there's a time to die. And we talked about how that is basically a description of human existence. From birth to death, there's your life. Now, what have you done for God, or what have you done at all in that life that's going to mean anything once you die? Solomon will come to that once we arrive at chapter 4. But knowing this fact, then we're given weight and we're given meaning to all of our activities in life. It gives us purpose to all of our planning, and it provides us focus for our attention. It points us in a direction, say, don't focus on the work itself. Focus on what's going to be achieved through the work. And don't focus on the paycheck that comes from the work itself. I wonder if you can ever arrive at a point in your life where payday came and you were 2 days after payday before you even realized it came. If you can live a life like that, where the payday came and it wasn't 2 days before payday that you were praying payday was today, but it was 2 days after you got paid that you said, oh, wait, I forgot all about my paycheck. I better record that in my check register. I better pay the bills by it. Because you got busy, not just in the work, just plowing the fields, going through your life, whatever your career is, but you got so busy enjoying the work, what's going to come by way of the work, that you forgot about the paycheck, although that's a benefit of work, no doubt. But God has given us the work that we may enjoy originally. Sin causes us to believe it to be hard. Sin causes us to dread it. Sin causes the sweat to come from our face, that we eat our bread by the sweat of our brow, as the curse upon man was given. And Solomon is saying, what Solomon is saying, I want to kind of comprise under just two main statements. And the statements are not going to seem to be interlocking. They're not going to be seeming to be, puzzle pieces that come together. But I think that they're both accurate. At least an accurate depiction of verses 11 through verse 15. And I want to help us to understand this. The first statement that I want to help us to see these verses from is this angle, that every action, that every event, that every occurrence in your life and mine will have its day in court. Every action, every event, every occurrence will have its day in court. What happens in court? Well, things are tried, right? We have to, the motives. So if it's a case of manslaughter, is it premeditated or is it accidental? If it's accidental, it's manslaughter, and it's definitely a less time, if any at all. If it's premeditated, it could be first degree or even second degree murder. And that could demand a death penalty, or it could demand life in prison, or at least a long time in prison. And so what happens in court is things are put to trial, they're put to test, evidence is given to the negative and to the positive to pronounce guilt or innocence, right? And so every activity, in your life and mine, every event that comes upon your life and mine, we're going to see, is this a waste of my time, or was this worth my time? Did I invest the time? Remember, time is how we started out chapter 3 in the first place. There's a time for every season. So the things that I'm involving my life in, because your life is so precious, God gives it to you 1 second at a time. 1 second at a time. If you offer somebody 10 minutes of your life, think about that. You've given them your time, you spared time, you've actually given them a portion of your life. And some of us have maybe wasted our life on the wrong people instead of invested our life into the right people. We've wasted our time, our life in the wrong avenues of pleasure and enjoyment and so forth like that. Entertainment is fine, but you can't spend all your life in that, and people do. Some people spend all their life in eating. My wife has been watching the 600-Pound Life, and it's sad to see. I just happened to catch one of the episodes she was watching. I glanced over in her phone, and there's these two very heavy, well-upholstered gentlemen, and sitting in their living room, and they've got sacks of cheeseburgers. And a cheeseburger that would make up the bulk of your face, their faces were so large that it just looked like one of those mini bites. If you've ever heard of White Castle, I mean, just this little slider type thing, and they're just stuffing their face with them. Well, what have they invested their life in? They've actually wasted it in the pursuit of eating, just constantly gorging their body. They haven't spent any time in exercise. They haven't spent any time in nutritional value. They haven't spent any time, obviously, in any other arena but in eating. And we can spend our years as a tale that is told and have nothing of value left. But every event and every activity and every occurrence in our life will have its day in court. Every single thing that happens to me solicits a response from me. If you stub your toe, what response are you going to give? Ow! You stupid door! I mean, you're going to do something. There's going to be a response. I mean, we're not so stoic that we can just pass on pain without hurting, without crying, or without complaining. Things that I expect to happen allow me to be proactive in predicting and have some solution prior to them coming. If I know it's about to take place, I'm going to be proactive in keeping it from harming me when it does. Other things blindside me. Have you ever been blindsided by something? You didn't know it was going to happen, and then it happened, and it can get you down. So then you're in a reactive mode, and you have to do something about it quickly because you can't stop it. All you can do is accept it and then do something to solve it, and then do something additional to prevent it from ever taking place again. Okay, this happened. I accepted it. I didn't like it. I worked through it. But now I'm going to put a plan in place to proactively prevent it from ever taking place again in my life. Or at least if it does, I will be ready. And that's what our lives comprise of. The truth behind about this is, in 2 words, comfort and challenge. So there is something comforting about every event, every occurrence, every action in my life is going to be put to trial, but there's also a challenge to it. So a comfort and a challenge. The comfort brought by these things is that, so consider this from example of a child who's frustrated because the parents tell them what to wear, the parents tell them what to eat, how much to eat, what they cannot eat, when they can watch TV, when they have to go to bed. And the child's frustrated because the child can only see what's presently bringing discomfort. On the other side of the coin, the parents see something well beyond that. If you stay up too late, you're not going to be prepared mentally for school in the morning. And if you don't brush your teeth, it's going to mean a great deal of dental work, or you're just going to have no teeth. So there's some things that, in bathing your body to prevent, to promote good health and prevent bad health and so forth. There's things that a parent is looking to a child and saying, I'm looking beyond the present discomfort. I'm looking at the goal, the finish line, and you need to do these things and learn to do them now so that you can arrive at the finish line. Whereas the child only sees the temporary discomforts. You and I are the same way. God looks out for our good, knowing that you have to go through the series of brushing your teeth, of going to bed on time, of getting dressed, of wearing this, not wearing that, or so forth. You have to do all these things. And we say, oh, this is just so upsetting and it's so discomforting to me. And I'm disappointed by my life and I'm just plain miserable. Only because it's present discomforts that are making us this way. When God's saying, but if you'll hang in there, the end result is going to be very positive for you. There's a comfort brought. Tremendous amount of security is afforded by simply obeying the Lord, for this is right. As children ought to obey their parents in the Lord, for this is right. We just obey the Lord because it's right to obey the Lord. He's looking out for our best interests, just like parents do. The comfort afforded us by the events that come to us in life is that God is preparing you and I for the future. He's preparing you for something that's going to happen one day. My experiences are part of a bigger picture and plan that I may not be privy right now. I have mentioned this just in passing, but maybe it's good to remind you that you can be in God's will right now, but if you stayed right where you are, you can ultimately be out of God's will. Take, for example, the children of Israel. It was God's will for them to go in the promised land. At Kadesh Barnea, they said, no way. And God said, okay, my will is for you not to go in the promised land. My will is for you to go 40 years wandering in the wilderness until you die. They said, okay, we'll go into the promised land. No, a lot of them died right there in battle because they chose to disobey what was at one time God's will. No, but that God's will had passed for them. Now God's will for them, and the only way they would enjoy the rest of their life is if they went wandering aimlessly in the wilderness. But then one day, God says, okay, now my will for you, Israel, has changed. It's now my will for you to go back into the promised land. Shall we go up through Kadesh Barnea? No way. I want you to go through the land of Bashan. I want you to face Og, the giant. And I want you to have to fight these battles and so forth and conquer the land there in those areas. So you can't go through the southern portion, which would be the quickest way. You have to go around now to the eastern side and plunge in westward that way. You see, so God's will did change for them. And you and I can become so stuck in what we believed at one time was God's will, and God's will rerouted, it altered the course, and we never followed His pattern. He said to make a right, we kept on going straight. Say, hey, God's will for me is the pastor of Bible Baptist Church. I'm just going to keep on going until Jesus comes back. But what if God altered my course? I keep on going until Jesus comes back. But then I could probably... maybe I could hurt the church. Is that right? What about you? I mean, some of you, well, God's will for me is to be a Dollar General. But God altered the course in your life, and now He put you in a different place. And now what you learned at Dollar General, now you're utilizing and helping other people in this new venture that you have in life. Are you in God's will? Of course you are. But are you in God's will from what it looked like when you first started? Well, of course not. Jesus was born in Bethlehem. How is He said to be Jesus of Nazareth? You see? And by the way, He wasn't very, very old at all before He was in Egypt. You talk about a turn of events. What if Mary and Joseph had said, you know what, I think we'll just stay in Egypt. Egypt is prosperous. I mean, we don't have to worry about Herod. I mean, we got Pharaoh here. But let's just raise him, then he never would have been called Jesus of Nazareth, and he would not have fulfilled the Scriptures. So God's will brought him into Bethlehem. God's will took him into Egypt. God's will took him into Galilee, into Nazareth. And can there anything good come out of Nazareth? Well, certainly there was. Jesus came out of Nazareth. So there's a comfort here. And we have great reason to trust and obey God now by resting assured that He knows my future, that my times are in His hands, and my success hinges upon learning today what I must know in that day. There are some that come to Ardmore, and Ardmore was your training ground. It was never God's intention that you stayed here, but it was God's intention that you come here, that you sojourned here. You got what you needed, and then you went out somewhere else where God's will was for your life. There are those in this room right now that are making decisions like that. There may be young people that are making decisions that I've learned right here what I'm going to take elsewhere. Maybe a young lady is learning at the feet of her mama and her daddy only to take what she's learned onto some mission field, marrying some man that became a missionary. And so she's learned right here to follow God's will elsewhere. Was it God's will for her to be here? Yes, absolutely. But his ultimate will may have been somewhere. And by the way, once they get there, they started a church. It may be God's will that leads her husband back to the States, as it were. And now she's back here. So is she still following God's will? Yes, there's a great comfort that every action, every occurrence will have its day in court. Make sure then that you're following God's will. And the second aspect of this is the challenge. There is a comfort, but there's also a challenge. And the challenge, there's a comfort brought and a challenge wrought. The challenge worked in our life, knowing that God is outside of time and sees more than I do, in the end will bring all my responses into judgment. It forces me to stop requiring of God that I be in control of my life. And I'm talking about every one of us in this room. In some way or another, we want to be the rulers of our own destiny. We want to take the job that we want to work. And if somebody, by the way, and here's another thing. One of the things that makes us skeptical about ever following God's will, if it meant that you had to get out of where you're at right now, what will everybody else think? What will everybody else say about me? I mean, suppose that I did move. You think of Brother Johnson pastoring in Texas, and now he's not pastoring in Oklahoma. In God's will, out of God's will. He's in God's will. But wait a minute, he was pastoring in Texas and now he's up here as a church member and he's got this escort service. A highway escort service. In God's will, out of God's will. He's in God's will. But God's will altered slightly than what he ever thought it would. There's no way that he would have been going to Arlington Baptist Seminary and think, you know, one day I'm going to either follow or lead big trucks down the highway. That's why I'm spending all this money in seminary. That's why I'm killing myself right now. He went through all the training right then to go and pastor for the time that he did, only to come out of that having learned what he needed in pastoring to go out and do what he's doing right now. Is it God's will? Yes or no? Yes. But is it challenging to consider I'm not the ruler of my own destiny? I have to follow what God says that I have to do. I cannot be in control of all that happens to me in my life, nor can I be in control of my destiny. It is not that life is filled with just good and bad times, but that God is in control of all that happens to me, and that causes me to think that first glance, that bad thing is actually what God wanted for me. Because that bad thing is ultimately going to bring something good. Therefore, I have to come back and reassess, maybe Monday's not as bad as all that. Because God's doing something by all my Mondays in life to bring forth a Friday. I mean, if you think in terms of good and bad. Or Wednesday, the ugly. Whichever you decide. The challenge is to realize that while God has given me all the pieces, and get this statement, while God has given me to all the pieces, He alone will provide me with the careful instructions about how they fit, where they go, and what time they should be put in place. You understand, right now you have gifts. You have gifts that maybe you haven't even realized you have. God's got a future for you that you may not, you may right now be so totally different than what the future God has planned for you. You say, yeah, that's right. You ought to tell them about it. All the older people are saying, you ought to say that to all the young people because no. For you old codgers as well. Everybody in here, within the sound of my voice, you're a believer in Jesus Christ. You're in God's family. God's got a plan and a purpose for you. And it may be totally different than what you're doing right now. Think of Joshua. Joshua was the captain of the host. Then he became the leader of the host. There's a big difference in that. I mean, a captain of the host, he just gets to go punch somebody in the face. But the leader has to be diplomatic about it before he sends his Joshua to punch somebody in the face. So, I mean, there's a big difference. There's a big difference. If you're sitting right there and one day you're going to become the pastor of Bible Baptist Church, there's a big difference between where you sit right now and where you stand later on. There's a big difference. And God can put you somewhere where you never thought that you were going to be. Are you willing then to accept Him as control of your life? And that is a hard thing. It's a very hard thing. Well, bless God, I'm going to be here and just leading this place like Moses was leading for 40 years. Well, not if God wants you out in 20. And by the way, who says that God has to be an even Stevens type of judge? You'll find that all the books of the Bible, they don't all end at 40 chapters, 20 chapters, 15 chapters. It doesn't always happen in multiples of 5 or in even numbers. Leviticus 27, for example. How about Jude? 1, followed by Revelation 22. It doesn't have to end that way. It could be that God's phase for your life lasted a year and the next phase lasts for 22 years, if we're using that little chapter verse type analogy. When I stand before Him, what will I be able to confess was missing? What was the missing piece in my life? The missing piece in my life that I forfeited by my ill behavior. The wicked pieces in my life that I lost because I missed out on the opportunity. The missing pieces of my life that I broke, or the missing pieces that I misused by not placing the right value and enlisting the right activity. Now, this is a difficult thing. Solomon is challenging us with the life that you live right now, God is making beautiful in His time. And don't think for a moment that just because you're in God's will right now and He's made that beautiful, that's it and that's all, and now you can put it on cruise control for the rest of your days. Because that time could change. Consider the disciples. They lived for 3.5 years with Jesus present on earth. Jesus ascends into heaven, and then what does the angel have to come back and say to these guys? What are you doing? What are you doing looking up in the sky? I know, I'm paraphrasing. Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus that you're looking for right now, He's going to come back the same way, and you better be busy for Him when He comes. What about the church at Jerusalem? They just ever and always, this is the way we've always ministered, in the same place, with the same people, and we're multiplying. We're seeing people added to the church daily, and sharp persecution comes around to do what? To change God's direction for their life. Some of them had to flee up north to Syria, into Antioch, Damascus. Some go out further westward, some into Rome, some even beyond that. And by the way, and we're thankful for that, otherwise we wouldn't have the gospel over here in America today. So the activities, every activity will have its day in court. Secondly, hardship never interrupts God's ultimate purpose. Hardship never interrupts God's ultimate purpose. Some of the stuff some of the hardships we bring upon ourselves. Have you ever had a whale's belly experience? You're exactly where you should have been because you made stupid choices. You need to be right where you're at because you made a dumb choice. Was it prison? And then there's some things that you did everything right and you did everything the way God wanted you to be, and you still landed in the whale's belly. Not that there's another episode of that in the Bible, but there is Paul. He's shipwrecked 3 times. Here he is floundering in the Mediterranean Sea, thinking, sure is good to be in God's will. He's shipwrecked upon the shores of Melita, barbarous people. Snake comes out, bites him in the wrist. Sure is good to be in God's will. He's in a hired house under house arrest. Sure is good to be in God's will. He's stoned and left for dead outside of the city of Lystra. He escapes the tortures of some of his own people by being let out in a basket over a wall. Sure is good to be in God's will. Being in God's will doesn't mean that it's a life without hardship. There's a lot of difficulty, but the hardships in life do not interrupt God's ultimate purposes for your life. Don't run from difficulty. If it's hard, that doesn't mean that it's not God's will. If it's hard, it might mean that God is working something for His glory through it. Again, let us consider Calvary. As we closed the sermon last week, we'll do it the same way this week. Not with the same words, of course. But God's ultimate purpose for Jesus coming to earth was to what? To seek and to save that which was lost. And how was He going to do that? He was going to have to suffer at the hands of wicked, vile men, have His beard plucked from His face, had His face spit upon and slapped and punched, have a crown of thorns plaited together and crushed upon His brow, have 39 lashes with a cat of 9 tails across His back. And if that weren't bad enough, hold up his own cross and carry it down that way of sorrows to a hill called Calvary, to Golgotha's Mount, and there be nailed, hanging before his peers, naked. The people that he came to save are the ones that put him on the cross. And this is God's plan. Did hardship interrupt God's purposes? Yes or no? No, of course it didn't. It was hard. It was difficult. But it was exactly what God wanted for his son. That brings us to conclude at least 4 things. First, that our life has meaning now. Jesus' life did not begin to have meaning at Calvary's cross. Jesus' life had meaning when it was being predicted that he would come. The people in the Old Testament looked forward. Their life had meaning then because they looked forward to the time he would come. The people, when Jesus finally did come, think about shepherds. They went away a different way, and so did the wise men. Think about the angels coming. I mean, the rejoicing in heaven, the rejoicing on earth. Think about those Annas and Simeon, those people that were in the temple that were so old and they wanted to see the Messiah before they kicked the bucket. They got to see that. And then they died, no doubt in peace. But our life has meaning now. Everything that we do is important in the process of fulfilling God's plan. It's not that, so somebody in here is saying, God's called me to preach, and one day I'm going to be in His will. Are you getting the training you need right now? Well, yeah. Well, then you're in His will. Are you taking the college classes, the courses? Are you studying your Bible every day to become a good, profitable servant of Christ? Well, yeah. Well, then you're fulfilling. Your life has meaning now. Nobody's a missionary just because they arrived on the field. The field is the world. Do you live on the world? Well, if you live in the world, then your life has meaning. Your life has meaning now. It's not because somebody says, well, I'm going to be a doctor someday. Are you training for becoming a doctor right now? Well, yeah. Well, then your life has meaning. It has meaning in every point from now until that first will, and then maybe there's a second or a third or so forth. You're following God's will. Your life has meaning and purpose and value right now. The second thing we can conclude is this, that being tempted to give up does not indicate failure. Just because you're tempted to quit doesn't mean that you should quit, and doesn't mean that you have quit. Seems like for a preacher, they get tempted to quit every Monday morning. Or maybe Sunday night. Possibly Sunday afternoon. Maybe they see in their people say, I'm not making a difference in these people's lives at all. Lord, you need to have somebody else. Think of Jeremiah. Jeremiah didn't make a difference in maybe only one person, Baruch. That's it. Maybe he didn't make a difference in anybody. But what of Isaiah? These men that served God with their purposes for a 40-year-long ministry, and at the end of it all were sawn asunder or destroyed in Egypt. Did their life have meaning? Of course it had meaning. Did they desire to quit? Remember what Jeremiah said? Oh, I just wanted to quit. I just wanted to give up. But His word was in my belly. It was in my spirit as a fire, and I just could not stay. I had to do something with it. So giving up was not an option for them, although being tempted to give up was something that they wrestled with. So being tempted, what about Christ? He was also tempted, yet He leaned upon what God had said in His word. And those 3 occasions He shoots out and fires out as it is written. Yea, hath God said. And He avoided the failing point. So your life and mine, your life has meaning now. And just because you're tempted to give up and quit doesn't mean that you're a failure. Thirdly, all that we face today, others have overcome yesterday. All that we are facing presently, others have overcome in the past. There's nothing that you're faced with today that others haven't been faced with before. And if they have overcome, they serve as an example to you and I that we can overcome. So, younger parents, you can make it with just 1, if others are making it with 8. And those with 8, they grow up, they leave the house, and there was great rejoicing. But now you've entered into another stage. And the older that I get, and looking into the future, and I'm seeing, you know what, I don't have much time left with some of my older kids in the house with me. And I think, what's it going to be like? And I put on my game face, and I tease and joke about, well, what am I going to do with their room? Will I be able to rent it out? No. Will I make it? I tease about things like that. But ultimately, in my heart, I think, man, I'm going to miss them. I'm going to miss hollering down the hallway their names and have them come running to me. And their response, I'm going to miss that. They're going to be starting there. So it's a new stage in life. Does that mean I'm no longer in God's will because I'm not parenting them anymore? I may be grandparenting somebody else. See, there's a new stage that's offered us, and other grandparents have made it through the stage of parenting into grandparenting, and I believe that I'll be able to make it too. In the last place, never allow what we cannot control to destroy all that we can enjoy. Never allow what we can't control to ruin what I could enjoy. Some of us are suffering in our relationships. And we're ruining relationships when we could enjoy them only because of the difficulties that we're enduring right now. It is difficult. I'm going through a mountain of difficulty right now. Mine may not be a Mount Everest right now, but it's a Pikes Peak. It's a Clingman's Dome. And these are the highest points in the Appalachians and the Rockies. They're difficult because I'm American. That's why I use it. I'm not from the Netherlands and places like that. But I'm saying that these are mountains for me. The difficulties that I'm facing right now, I can have tempted to quit, and that doesn't mean I'm a failure. By thinking we could control what happens in our lives, we become discouraged when we learn how futile our actions are to prevent them. I cannot prevent them. Not only that, but we tend to miss out on enjoying those around us. We tend to miss out on enjoying those that help balance the scales between the positive and the negatives. I believe that I can face anything as long as my wife goes with me. I believe that I can overcome as long as my Lord goes with me. And if He sent these things into my life, He wants them for me. Why should I complain about what He's given to me? My lot in life. Well, I like, and close with another analogy, maybe something that you've seen before. I think we ought to all be content with loving the bare necessities of life. It's for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. Oh, yeah. And see, I have to speak into your language. It is bare necessities, certainly, but it's what God gives us. And I close with this last statement. Life is not a prison sentence. It is an adventure in which God is our guide and will ultimately be our judge at the end of our journey. So if you're still breathing, you're still alive, your journey is not over. We sing the song, Faith of Our Fathers, that He will be our guide unto when? Unto death. Our guide unto death. And in the end of it all, every man will give an account of himself as we stand before His judgment seat. Our Father, it is with great pleasure that we come again to You, presenting ourselves, our life, our failing points, our weaknesses, our strengths, our assets, our families, our burdens, our cares, our desires, our wishes, our habits, both good and bad. We bring before You these things, and we ask that You would take up the tangled strands that we have wrought in vain. But by the skill of Thy dear hand, some beauty may remain. Help us to, Father, consider these things that You've made everything beautiful in its time. We have no idea what You're going to do in the end of it all. Help us to be content to be along for the ride, along for the journey. Guide us. May we move as You see fit that we move. When it's time for us to go to the wilderness, may we go to the wilderness. If it's time for us to go into the promised land to do battle, let us be willing. If it's time to rest at peace and build our houses, may we do that. Father, may we ever seek Thy face and be in connection with You. May You have full control in our lives. And we will always give Thee thanks for what You're working through and by our lives. In Jesus' name, amen.